Welcome to the Continuous Transformation Podcast, where spirit and science meet and creatively merge to give birth to the future. Disclaimer: high risk of life-transforming perspectives.
This is the best time to begin your continuous transformation process.
Your host is Advaita Nanda, a visionary, influencer and scientist with a quantum physics background and more than 30 years' experience of yoga, tantra and meditation practice and teaching. What do we cancel when we cancel culture? Maria Porsfeld courageously raises the question that can easily get your fingers burned. Dive in and discover revealing perspectives on a phenomenon that is far from new and represents one of the strongest moral tests of our generation.
What does it mean, cancel culture? An aggression on nations and people. It is known that culture is intimately related to the core of a nation.
Who is it that dictates what is right and wrong right now? Not just in the level of opinions, but actually all the way into lawmaking.
This is the problem. We never looked into that. A high-tech giant can cancel the president of one of the biggest countries on the planet.
People tell you, if you don't agree with me, just unfriend me. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute, surely we can disagree and still be friends and have a conversation and grow in our understanding.
Of course, the problem with this wokeness today is the cultivation, if we look deeper, of an overinflated egotistic attitude. This attitude makes people easily triggered by even their own shadow.
Everything is basically based on personal interests or likes or dislikes, and there is no real constant factor like sense of ethics or moral.
Since 3 decades, we almost have never seen a political party rising because of a solid platform of ideas. Hello and welcome to the Continuous Transformation Podcast. I'm Advaita Nanda, and today we will talk about a controversial topic that makes a lot of debates in our world today. We'll talk about what we cancel when we cancel culture. Recently, another victim of this neo-cultural revolution was displayed and publicly almost lynched by the what I call woke brigades. The famous author for children's books, Dr. Seuss. Born in 1904 in Springfield, Massachusetts, Theodore Geisel Seuss is one of the widespread influencers and educators of the world today. His reach is wider than the over 700 million books sold worldwide because he was educating children. A liberal Democrat, Seuss passionately opposed fascism, racism, anti-Semitism, and all the antisocial behavior. However, it seems that for the hungry for attention and eternally triggered woke brigades, even such an attitude was not strong enough. He practically didn't apologize enough for them. Recently, the editor of Dr. Seuss books decided to withdraw 6 of the titles from printing because, quote, they feature animal and non-human characters that transmit Orientalist, anti-black, and white supremacist messages through allegories and symbolism, end quote. And also, quote, these books portray people in ways that are hurtful and wrong, end quote. This is coming from Dr. Seuss Enterprise. Apart from the obvious lack of consistency from this desperate attempt of Dr. Seuss editor to prove to be very woke in these times, this recent page in the cancel culture saga shows a severe problem. When the propaganda machine have reached the education of children, we can say without any mistake that the attack is on the future of our world. Now, make no mistake that all these acts of wokeness, we can say, are always done by people and not by some evil people that force their will upon us. It's just people. This is, unfortunately, just a small example in a too long chain of similar events that we read about today, that we witness in our world today. Of course, the very notion of cancel culture seems strange at a closer look, because culture in itself is not something that is inherently bad. Culture was the enemy of extreme regimes, we know that. It was considered bad by, for instance, fake righteous people, which unfortunately they are more and more present today. It is considered dangerous by opportunists as well as by the tyrants. In the country where I grew up, for instance, the communist Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, the dictator as we call him, who cannot spell correctly in his own language, was afraid of culture, and he made efforts to cancel its effects on people. But unfortunately, what we all witnessed at the time, he was not alone. Together with him, there were the brigades of people who see an opportunity to affirm their mediocrity and to occupy an undeserved place in the society. And therefore they created an entire trend, which unfortunately looks so much like the one we see today. On the other hand, let's not forget, culture is, and here is a definition from the dictionary, quote, that which is excellent in arts, in manners, in human behavior, end quote. Another definition, culture is a particular form or stage of civilization as that of a certain nation or a certain period of time. Culture is also the development or improvement of consciousness by education and training. Now, stop a little bit and think. Who would want, who in sane mind, with common sense, want to cancel culture if culture is that which I've just mentioned? But more than this, here is another part of the definition of this term. Quote, culture is the sum of total of ways of living built up by a group of human beings and transmitted from one generation to another. End quote. Of course, it is known that culture is intimately related to the core of a nation, and therefore all the attempts to annihilate a people or a nation contain, sooner or later, an attack on their culture. So, of course, we need to rightfully wonder, what does it mean cancel culture? Because if we see from this perspective, cancel culture is an aggression on nations and people. When cancel culture is an aggressively propagandistically pushed concept on the world, that means a direct attack to the core values of nations and on people. According to this, we can conclude quite simply that cancel culture is a covert intellectual terrorism that aim at the integrity of human consciousness in order to make it weak, to make it obedient and easy to control. All this is done in the name of a greater good that, of course, those who evoke it never have the words to define it. There is, however, hope we can see today rising as well. Public figures start to join the so-called silent majority. And they start to not stay silent anymore. They start to speak out. Recently, in an interview, Piers Morgan says, quote, this cancel culture, this eradication of history, this rewriting of everything, this inability to allow or to tolerate anything that you don't believe yourself, it's the antithesis of liberalism. It's the enemy of democracy. And it got to stop. End quote. Another promising example in this respect that I want to bring to your attention is the rising British actor and singer Laurence Fox. Fox started by sharing openly his opinion about the need for true open debate, about woke being anti-British, as he put it, about the bigotry of science today. To his big surprise, Laurence Fox found himself in the line of fire of the woke brigades. Actually, I have to say this was not a big surprise, but the bigger surprise that Laurence Fox had when he publicly expressed his opinion was that he became a symbol for a large number of people who do not dare anymore to express their opinions because of the aggressiveness of this noisy minority. A recent poll showed that more than 50% of the Brits feel less free to express their opinion than 5 years ago, and this is due to cancel culture. They explicitly pointed out this current. Laurence Fox's reaction of refuting the cancel culture found a lot of support, and in October 2020 he founded the Reclaim Party. Of course, this situation is not new, though it might feel new for those who prematurely cancelled culture, prematurely cancelled history, and therefore they do not remember certain things. But let's remind each other about certain events that happened that we cannot deny. In 1933, the German Student Union, please mark, it's German Student Union, proclaimed the, quote, action against the un-German spirit, end quote. And therefore the burning books parties began. Students as well as teachers alike elaborated a list of concepts and even terms that were unacceptable anymore. More than 4,000 titles were purged from the, we can say, Amazon of their time, the libraries. On their list were children books, history books, even romance. The action was applauded and rationalized by 34 known universities across Germany. Does it sound familiar? In 1966, the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution was launched in China by the communist leader Mao Zedong. The goal of it, to preserve the progressive spirit of the revolution and to eliminate the traditional values and capitalist thought. How did they do this? Very simple. The masses were encouraged to rebel against all the concepts and all the authors that do not unconditionally support the view of the people. Of course, the view of the people, which was represented humbly by Mao Zedong and his party. The list of terms, new terms, were immediately published for the masses to easily spot. They were even given this list in order to spot and expose promptly the, quote, evil habits of the old society, end quote. Schools were closed, and instead of reopening, the authorities encouraged the students to, quote, rebel against these manifestations, end quote. And more than this, authorities, when people started to protest against violences that appeared, they said, quote, rebellion is justified, end quote. Student formed at the time Red Guards. The population entered a frenzy of denounces and compete in spotting any anti-citizen elements, as they call it. The sources are now debating upon the death toll of this initiative. Between 1 and 2 million people, it is said, they were killed in this purge, publicly lynched just because they refused to give in to all kinds of absurdities that these lists of intellectuals contained. Tens of millions of people lost their livelihood to this cancel culture in the Chinese version. The Red Guards burned tens of millions of books, paintings, art objects, and so on. In Beijing only, out of 6,843 historical and cultural places, 4,922 were leveled to the ground. Teachers that refused to comply with the newly emitted list of correct terms, again, striking similarity, and notions, were put in mandatory group trainings, which were in fact a form of group aggression and bullying. Lots of people died in this mandatory group training because they were collective rapes, they were beatings to death, and that was the mandatory group trainings. Only in Kinzhou area, 11,979 teachers were forced in these dehumanizing programs. The enforcers of these programs were not some evil, faceless soldiers. They were the Red Guards formed by students and teachers. They issued even what they call at the time, ironically, the 5 black categories list, which were landlords, rich farmers, counter-revolutionaries, bad influencers, and rightists. Of course, if you look at this, you step back a little bit and look at this situation, how is this different from the 8 stages of whiteness that was forced on some employees from different big companies in the United States just last month? The same happened in USSR, where prolet cult aimed to create a pure culture for people. It is said, according to historic sources, that 750,000 people, perhaps more, died in fast executions, while over 1 million people were sent to gulags because they didn't enthusiastically embrace the unconditional surrender towards this new type of culture. Of course, cancel culture is today what all these movements were in the past. It doesn't take a genius to notice the striking similarity. Every time you would do this comparison, at the time they would they will feel triggered. So if you go in the time of, for instance, in communist China, and you say you behave like Hitler brigades, like the student union in Germany, they will feel terribly triggered. They would say, this is not true because we do it for the people. Every time it is done for the people in the name of progress. Of course, the problem with this wokeness today is the cultivation, if we look deeper, of an overinflated egotistic attitude. This attitude makes people easily triggered by even their own shadow. The result is that they do not follow anymore anything they do not like, and therefore they develop a kind of a herd mentality because they cannot stand on their own feet. They live in a bubble of people that agrees with them. And that is dangerous because in this way, they do not see the disaster they create around. Moreover, because the blind brigades, as we can call them, much more like red brigades in their time, fight with an invisible enemy that is just given by a trustworthy source, and they never check the source. In this way, they are exposed to severe manipulation. Never facing the real problem, they prefer to fight proxy. by drones in the real world today, and by the anonymity of an internet that supports their cause unconditionally, as we see today. The problem is that they never dare to look inside and to take care, as it should be normal, of those triggers. Should they eliminate the triggers, then we will not have this kind of reoccurring problems. Of course, this situation, this wokeness today, lead to the hordes, we can say, of righteous Don Quixote type of characters that are running around and are charging inanimate objects, just like the character in the story. Of course, the objects that they are charging today, just like this Don Quixote character, are not anymore the windmills, because as we know, we make friends with the windmills now. We like them. But the inanimate objects the Don Quixote characters are charging today are the statues, the artworks, the books, or even the ideas. Of course, for many, this situation today might sound crazy and even unique. But reality is different because, as we know, history repeats itself when we do not learn its lessons. I invited today a special guest to join me in this talk about this very sensitive issue, what we cancel when we cancel culture. My guest today is Maria Porstfeld, a wonderful woman whose attitude in this matter makes her a great partner for dialogue. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you very much, Ava. I'm very happy to be here and have the chance to discuss such an important topic.
I know that you've been waiting for this kind of talk quite a long time, and just like you, there are so many people, as the statistic shows, in UK where you live, more than half of the population don't dare to speak out, even though they have a totally different opinion on this cancel culture syndrome. Now, few words for those of you who listen to us now about Maria. Maria is a Dane living in London. She is having a bachelor degree in philosophy, and she's teaching esoteric yoga and esoteric tantra in Tara Yoga Center in London, where she is actually the coordinating teacher, the daily leader of Tara Yoga Center. Maria is a practitioner with great aspiration and great results, and she defined herself very often as a fervent student of life itself. Maria was starting her practice, as I know, for over 20 years, now. And yes, and this topic seemed to be one of the topics that burn your fingers today and makes you sometimes speak out. I heard you talking in different moments about this, and you are one of the courageous people who is not afraid to approach this topic. So what's your take in this?
First of all, I think it's really important we speak about it, because then we realize we're not alone, because you have this impression nobody else thinks such a thing. But as you say, 50% of the population at least are actually in agreement, and that in itself I feel makes it a really important topic. Then I think for myself, actually, the way it shocked me the most to begin with is from my background in philosophy. Because I kind of learned to really appreciate somebody with a different point of view if they have intelligent arguments, because then you get to examine your own perspective, you grow in understanding, and something really great can come out of that. And then I noticed that somehow that environment doesn't seem to exist so much anymore. Even on Facebook, I noticed you kind of get unfriended if you don't have the right opinion. You get shamed first and then unfriended, or people tell you, if you don't agree with me, just unfriend me. And I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I mean, surely we can disagree and still be friends and have a conversation and grow in our understanding. So I think that was first where I started getting concerned. about this situation. And then kind of it deepened. I mean, now after your introduction, I'm really concerned. Making these correlations is really putting it in a much bigger perspective, isn't it? The gravity of this situation.
Yeah, I wanted to do this because to remind about even historic elements, because I have witnessed the effects. I grew up in the communist Romania, and I've seen the effects of this culture revolution, which is cancel culture in its different clothes, in different shape. So I've seen it firsthand, what it generates and what the dangers are.
Yeah, but I think kind of for me it grew as an understanding, because it started a little bit with this observation on Facebook and just noticing that there wasn't space for discussion anymore. And then I became aware of it as a phenomena, actually around this situation with J.K. Rowling and her having a big reaction for daring to say that a man cannot be a woman in the same way as a woman who was born a woman, which for me seems like a fairly innocent thing to say. Clearly it wasn't. Not that I want to make this about gender.
Yeah, of course, the worrying thing is not that she stated something correct or not. The reaction to that. The reaction that you cannot tell your opinion. You have a strong opinion, even based by scientific facts. But even if it is debased, like the other opinion, debased on scientific facts, still, it's an opinion. Yes, of course, it could be right, it could be wrong. But the fact that you are not allowed to say it, well, reminds me so much about the society where I grew up.
Exactly, and clearly there were more who saw it like this, because then came this open letter that was signed by 150 different authors and academics, activists, actually against this cancel culture phenomena and how dangerous it is. And it really hit home with me, because it kind of started giving a voice to these concerns I had when seeing how that phenomenon was actually around me. Now, fortunately, I think I'm surrounded often by different kind of people, practitioners who dare to dive in and see things from different perspectives. So Facebook kind of was my interface to be confronted with this phenomena, but starting to put it in a larger context. And now with what you're adding on, really, I mean, it starts to become something really worrying that makes you wonder, like, where are we going with this? I mean, where did that come from, and how will it impact us as a society if we don't dare to do something about it?
Yeah. Well, actually, this is a legitimate question, where it comes from, because if we understand where it comes from deeper and deeper, and I'm not saying there is one answer to that, but of course, it is a journey towards understanding where this kind of situation come from, because we cannot deny that it's repeating. And then, of course, if it's in science, we know that if a phenomenon repeats itself, you look for the law, you look for the cause that is generating it. You cannot just say, well, it's a coincidence, then it happens again, another coincidence, then it happens again. That's the third coincidence. What is you are this is how human being is explained to have appeared, by a incredible chain of coincidences. Of course, there are laws, there are principles behind it, and therefore, it's very important, in my opinion, instead of cancel the search, to increase the search. We definitely have an appetite to run away from what? From responsibility. You know, the kid who is hiding the effects of what he did there wrong. When the mommy comes in the room, or the father, or whoever the authority is for the kid, and then he did something, broke something, or eat what he was not allowed to, and then he tries to hide it. This is one of the things that, of course, and then we sanction it violently, and out of fear, of course, next time he will go all the length to hide and lie and do all these actions. And cultivating this kind of attitude, and the society in the same time losing its moral compass, and therefore being very often rewarded if you are the one lying the best, if you are the one hiding your mistakes the best, practically the virtuous people today in the eyes of the society are the champions in hiding their mistakes. If you hide mistakes very well, you appear as perfect. While the people who are honest, they are in disadvantage, because, who is perfect? And then, of course, well, you are in disadvantage. And when you have such a system, because it becomes like a systematic cultivation on non-value, together with this exteriorization of the attention, that you don't look inside, hey, I did a mistake, it is mine. You try to fix it by fixing the effects of it, which we do in everything today, including curing diseases. We try to hide the disease instead of curing the cause of it and so on. So it's the same pattern of thinking. When these kind of forces are combined in a character of a person, cancel culture is the result, because you can't take responsibility anymore for almost anything. These are the triggers today. It's exactly like that very beautiful, I think it's Chinese, but ancient, forbidden Chinese saying, instead of putting a carpet in the whole world, try to wear slippers. If I'm not mistaken, they even invented slippers. So you wanted to not be triggered by any little stones or thorns on the way, then you try to put a carpet. But they say, have common sense, wear slippers, because maybe somebody liked the roughness of the terrain and so on. So it comes from this kind of hiding from ourselves. And as long as we cannot see ourselves, you see, what we face also in the yoga practice today, in spiritual practice today, very often people try to fix something outside without realizing, and you saw yourself in your practice and in your teaching others, how long it takes for people to get this habit to look inside of themselves as the cause of the problem. And that is, as a consequence of a systematic coming back to waves of canceling everything that reminds us about ourselves. Practically, they will forbid mirrors instead of keeping a diet. Because mirrors shows the fat, ugly people that grows very often today in the cities because of lack of exercise, and then, of course, why not forbidding mirrors? They will say it's unethical to put mirrors in every hallway, in elevators and so on. Why do you want to remind me? And, well, of course, this is perhaps far-fetched. Who knows? I was there when the dictator ordered no windows with curtains in the country. Imagine that. Because the reason was, why do people want to have a curtain? What do they have to hide? And it was a presidential act in beginning of 1989 or ending 1988 at the border there, where all curtains were forbidden. Well, was that different than all mirrors are forbidden? So
the fashion industry might fight that one, though.
Well, you'll never know. You look at all the industries today. They cancel their actors because they have a correct opinion. Yeah, they simply cancel even though they lose money, but they don't care about that. So I wouldn't count on the fact that this, let's say, an industry will be guided by laws of economy. No, when it comes to this kind of political hysteria, it's you will see monsters.
What you touched on now, also this idea that kind of it becomes institutionalized with laws. I think that's where it also gets really concerning, because I could say, okay, I don't care if people shame me or tell me bad things or unfriend me on Facebook. What do I care? But then suddenly it starts to get into the lawmakers. It starts to get into the places where people are it starts to get into the jobs and different other areas of people's lives, where suddenly for one tweet that somebody wrote 3 years ago, they get fired, or even that you actually get cancelled and you can't anymore say what you want to say and you don't have a platform, where Twitter, for instance, suspended 900 and something thousand accounts in a span of 6 months last year because they weren't according to their policies, whatever they are. And of course,
imagine, just a parenthesis, excuse me, Maria, just a parenthesis. These numbers starts to look Chinese. I mean, Chinese in numbers, you know. These numbers starts to look like the Chinese, cultural revolution in China. Exactly, 900,000 accounts. This is like already starting to look.
Yeah, and then, I mean, of course I understand that people should be kept accountable for their actions and that we shouldn't support violence towards others in any way. We should respect each other, human rights, and definitely. Still, somewhere there, where is the line actually? Because I'm wondering, who is it that dictates what is right and wrong right now? Not just in the level of opinions, but actually all the way into lawmaking. As it's unfolding.
This is the problem. We never looked into that before. Politicians were the politics generally was allowed to develop almost unattended. In the name of this idea of public power, democracy, they develop all kinds of strange things that have nothing to do with true representation of people, nothing to do with democracy and so on. And now these flaws are coming to the surface. Look, high-tech giant can cancel the president of one of the biggest countries on the planet. I mean, just cancel it, eliminate, we don't like you. And who was in the committee that dismissed were 12, 13, 15, doesn't matter, people with underqualification in social skills. So they are geeks. They are people who stay locked in the room and work with computers. They do probably a good job in what they are doing there. Totally underqualified to take such a decision, and yet they took it, and they could enforce it. But this was allowed because it was this prostitution in politics to use any means possible to gain favors and so on. And underneath, it's always happening in all empires, in all unhealthy developed societies. It always happened this, let's say, underground development of all kinds of strange structures, which are now just coming to the surface. And we saw it before, because all these symptoms, they didn't appear, the Bolsheviks were there in Russia, you know. They just came to the surface because of a corrupt leadership, because they couldn't lead anymore, because people got estranged from what? From themselves. And because of that, a cancer grew in the society. And when it erupted, it took 70-something years for the society not to heal completely, but at least to get rid of that tumor. And so on. Many other countries suffered of that. Yeah, Hitler was there in the country. He was not an alien that landed straight in their parliament, in the Reichstag there. No, Hitler was there already. And he was supported and voted by people. And by the way, all these movements in China, in USSR, in Germany, they were born in university campuses. They were born in the student movements and supported by teachers, interestingly. So, which is what we see today. And yes, censorship is not a surprise. Personally, maybe you heard me saying, preaching more than saying, almost preaching years ago, that censorship will come. And everybody was laughing, like, what do you mean? I mean, this is free social media. That's the whole point of social media. No. That's the point that was selling it. But the structure itself, as long as it is based on or built up from an unconscious mass of people, it will generate exactly the same things time and again, generation after generation, exactly the same reaction. So that's inevitable.
It seems to me that it will create a very volatile structure, because what I'm hearing is that everything is basically based on personal interests or likes or dislikes, and there is no real constant factor like a sense of ethics or moral. Nevertheless, it's kind of being put forward as if this is a kind of a clear standard of ethical and moral behavior, and if you don't live up to that, you are wrong. But it seems there is actually no foundation underneath that.
There is no foundation, because that construct is not based on knowing thyself and having therefore clear options inside of you. For instance, moral options, principles. Since I think 3 decades, we almost have never seen a political party rising because of a solid platform of ideas. No, they just promise something immediately, like if you elect me, next day I will do that. And that's all. Usually they don't keep the promise, but that's another part of the story. But they don't come with an ideology, with an idea, with a view upon the world. And not because they don't have one or they couldn't have one. They don't do the effort because nobody will read such a thing. And you don't read such a thing because you don't search inside of you for something. So therefore, this is happening also in the spiritual field, in training people. How many times you were telling me that you're tired of these people who are teaching meditation in a hilarious way. They don't explain the concept of meditation. They don't explain the mechanism of consciousness that lead to meditation. They just say, close your eyes, do this, arrange your body in this position. They sing a little bit of some Tibetan bowls or something, and they say, meditation, congratulations. They even give you a diploma. They do that and they sell that because people buy it. Because people don't want to look for more. They say, it's enough for me. I just get a little bit of something there to make me feel good and eliminating the cause. I'm not interested in that. I just want a pill to make me feel good, even if you are not good in essence. So it's also a degree of... just a second to add here, perhaps the perspective of real versus imaginary. Today, we very much emphasize on imaginary. If you feel good, even though you are just on anesthetics now and you are in a terminal phase, it's fine. It's fine. People might tell you, but you are dying. No, but it feels good. It feels good. Even though you are told that your definition is, if I feel good, is good. And of course, that can create monsters, because what if you feel good on the expense of somebody else's health or life?
But this is what I'm considering, and it's probably where the philosophy in me gets into this. When everything is based on something that doesn't actually have a foundation, but like personal likes or dislikes, there's bound to be also some conflicts, you should think.
Normal. But first of all, it's inherently immoral. It's inherently immoral. Imagine exactly this with a trigger. Imagine this. You are triggered by somebody's face. I don't know. They look in a certain way and you get triggered. And you don't care. Hey, but if I get triggered like that, I should take care because the person cannot change their face. They are born with it. You don't care. You start to act against what? Killing the person, let's say, in extreme. But you find it normal today because you say, but it triggered me. Well, you don't kill the person with a knife, but you kill with a word, with a tweet, with a trend of tweets that destroy the life of that person just because you triggered me. I mean, this is so deeply immoral, and what's the difference between that and taking a knife and stabbing the person to death? In reality, science was proving today that the words can hurt even more than a punch in the face. So actually these are crimes. The wokes are doing crimes. They should be put in jail for it because it's exactly was like somebody committing murder.
So it seems a bit paradoxical to me because it seems on one hand it's completely arbitrary and I can be triggered by whatever triggers me, but then it doesn't actually seem to be the case because there seems to be a standard for what is the right way of being triggered and what should you be triggered by as a whole in society right now. Of those who are loud, of course, because there might also be such a thing as a silent majority, as you pointed towards. But at least the ones who are loud seem to have a very common idea of what is a trigger. Where does that come from?
No, the common idea, you see, this is always the disguise of the wolf in sheep clothes. It was used in all the modern societies. Since 300 years already, we can trace it, and even long before, ancient Rome was using that. Panem et circus. It was the slogan that they used to make the masses, convince the masses to do what is needed, what they need, and explain this is what you need in return. Which is not what they need in return in reality, but they got something so they couldn't see past that. So what I'm saying is the fact that this is the way a private interest is disguised to convince everybody else this is what it should go. It is planned, this set of values that triggers today, if you put them on a larger picture, you will see they serve a particular interest, which is not even necessarily in my interest or your interest, by the way. It's just a very narrow view upon life, and everything else is excluded. Everything that is not part of that is a trigger today. You belong to that kind of category, who don't like these things, who like those things. So practically the whole frenzy today is to spot anything else that is opposing the revolution, the Great Reset. Well, this was always what I call the revolution of the hunchbacks, the revolution of the people who cannot fight straight. But still they are desperate to win. They don't even know why they are so desperate to win, but they need that. Ultimately, they run away from themselves. They are in such an inner conflict. Of course, there are people who can see that. They are part of the silent majority. If you ask him or her, why don't you also say your opinion? They will say, I don't say it because my opinion is just a particular opinion. I don't think it's normal that I try to shout it out because this is my view, I work on it, and I respect your view. So therefore, I'm not shouting. But the one who forgot completely about this simple, common sense experience of togetherness, he doesn't care. He shout until you're deaf from their voice. Shouting continuously, no, I don't want to hear you, you're bad. Me, I didn't even finish telling my opinion. Doesn't matter. So, yeah, it is paradoxical, but it comes from this tendency to run away from our own problem, blaming the others for our own issues. It's always there. There is always a certain category of people living on the planet who are at that level of evolution where you have too much inside to fix, and it's much easier. It's very tempting to blame the world for your underprivilege, for whatever is that you are blaming the world for. Yeah. Imagine this whole theory. By the way, I was thinking the other days, how will they sell in India and in other parts of the world where people generally embrace the idea of reincarnation easier? How do you sell the underprivileged categories and all these concepts today, which are not qualifying as concepts, in my opinion? But anyway, let's abuse the term and give them the the doubt of calling that concept. How do you sell? Because, hey, I'm born underprivileged this life, but maybe it's because in another life I was overprivileged. And how do you fix that? How do you fix that in a timeline that is thousands and thousands of generations?
Yeah, but it is so interesting and so true what you're saying, that somehow the ones who are very loud and very justified in being loud are actually the ones who are aggressive, while aggressively calling somebody else who is just humbly expressing an opinion in many cases, the one who is violent and aggressive and intolerant. And then you sit there and you look at it and it just looks like insanity. And I think it makes many people very frustrated somehow, this way of interacting, and the ones shouting the loudest are apparently supported in that, even if it sounds sometimes completely insane.
Now, you pointed out something very nice here. Apparently, you are in disadvantage. And this is one of the very big problems today. It's what I call the moral test of our generation. This is one of the strongest moral tests of a generation, when almost everyone is given the temptation to fall into this kind of current, because it seems that it gives you an advantage. I have seen it in a small scale when I grew up. You see, if you give in to the becoming party member, Communist Party, because there was only one party, Communist Party member, and you start to be a little bit active in exposing things and so on, your career will be boosted. While if you're just yourself, honest citizen, you're in disadvantage. I've seen that, and how many people fell into the temptation saying, what shall I do? I mean, look around. We're surrounded by all this. Not only, we are surrounded by countries like us in the same nightmare, in the same crazy nightmare. What can I do, me, as an individual? And then, well, you fall into. Exactly the same happens now at a global scale. You feel that it's a disadvantage to be a hero. Why? Because the hunchbacks will stab you in the darkness from behind, because they have no morality. They have no values to stay on. While you, if you are a moral person, if you are standing up, you are fighting straight. Well, no chance to fight straight, because they put a sniper very far away on the building and they take you down before you have a chance to see them. You know, this kind of... And then, of course, it seems like you are in a disadvantage. But that's the moral test of an entire generation, in my opinion, because beyond that, even if, let's say, you are apparently in a disadvantage, there is still a critical mass of people that are this silent majority that are inherently good. They don't fall for it. And at the right moment, I am convinced, and this moment is accelerated, now it's coming closer and faster and faster, pushed by what? By this joke with cancel culture and other things, wokeness and so on. So actually they are bringing closer the moment when this silent majority will not stay silent anymore and will stand up, will say, we have enough. Stop it a little bit. Guys, it's crazy. And we are actually the majority. We decide here. I mean, we just let you play because we are good. And then we gave you the chance to learn something. But now, enough. So, not enough learning. Of course, they will learn from something. Some of them, they will choke on their own vomit of being triggered 1,000,000 times stronger when you stop them from doing what they are doing. Absolutely. But in a certain way, this kind of running away from home attitude will start to be returned in its own way, in its own foot. So, yeah, I think this disappointment or frustration, as you put it, is true. It's kind of part of this moral test that we're facing today. If we give in, and just because, fine, it feels good to be part of the wokeness, part of the progress of humanity, which is a joke, but again, you at least feel better. If you give in, you'll feel much worse. But I have experienced myself, you stay standing strong into yourself, you have chances to discover more and more about yourself. And the stronger you become inside, the more autonomous you become, the more you have a sustainable happiness, no matter what happens around. So, yeah, that would be a direction, I would say.
I think it is a test for many at the moment to watch somehow the dialogue unfolding and feeling like you are just looking at something that's completely absurd. And yet it's being taken very seriously. You almost have to pinch yourself because it's so surreal. But then where it gets really worrying, because you would say, okay, never mind. Again, it's when it reaches the level of your life, because it influences institutions and lawmaking and all sorts of other things. And then, I mean, is there anything we can do about that, should do about that, those of us who don't buy into the wokeness?
Well, you see, what we can do is to fix it inside. Never underestimate the power that you have inside you as a person. You see, this is the statistic thinking. This is where statistic thinking is too short. Statistic thinking is great to discover laws and to discover trends and meta patterns around ourselves. But this is where statistic thinking fails. Because the right person in the right moment, in the right place, can be the pivot for shifting the world. So what I'm saying is that every person who understands these things and pass the test, the moral test, that symbolically speaking, this moral test now, will be such a candidate of this essential, the drop that makes the difference. One person, of course, maybe there will be 10, maybe there will be 100, maybe there will be 100,000. I'm not saying one, symbolically speaking, because, you know, sometimes it takes one person to have the moment of lucidity and to say, stop, no. And yes, it might be that that person will be even crucified. Not physically, we're not 2,000 years ago, but still crucified. But that can trigger a revolution, just like Jesus. Because after all, Jesus was one who said no, he stood up. Everything was very clear, set up for thousands of years before him. Who are you to come and tell us what to do? Hello? Yeah. And he just said, stop what you're doing. And he actually, well, he was crucified, physically crucified, but there was the silent majority who then started to not be so silent because he gave them words. He put words into that silence of them. They were disgruntled by the deviation of the religious power, by the deviation of leadership in their own country, in the empire, in everywhere. There were everywhere people. And then he came with what? With words saying, forgive them. That's what you can do. Surprising solution. I mean, people were expecting, tell us how to fight. And he said, yeah, turn the other cheek. Surprise, shock. They were all stoned. Stoned, yes. And in the end, actually, it created a huge trend. So what I'm saying, not to compare any of us with Jesus, but simply to be the right person in the right moment, to be the one standing up and saying enough. But to do that, from my experience, you can't wait. You need to prepare. How do you prepare? By this autonomy that you gain. Yes, observe outside. I'm also myself reading and listening to all these situations. I'm also listening to the wokeness. I'm also listening to all the voices that are propagating it with great enthusiasm sometimes and with an energy. Honestly, if they would invest the same energy in their own evolution, they would be very far on the spiritual path in the good sense. But now they are very far in the bushes with the same energy, with the same speed. Anyway, the point is I'm listening, I'm scanning all these elements, but I'm finding the peace in the storm. I'm finding a balance in all this. I'm aiming to understand myself. Why do I react, for instance? Why am I frustrated by these things? And once I know this, once I'm ready, once I will not feel frustrated, I will not feel afraid to speak, but I will not feel also triggered by anything they speak back to me and so on, I am ready for whatever comes. And then from what I know from the laws of the universe will prepare a space-time continuum twist in such way that I will be placed in the right place, in the right time, being the right person, and I will just say the right word. Yeah. So maybe this is the right word. Yeah. It's true. It's a big dilemma, this one. Let's do something with this. And of course, what we can do more than instructing ourselves and sharing openly these opinions, we can't do more. Militantism, activism comes from the wrong place. It's such a tempting thing. You see, it's an entire category today, militants and activists. The internet is full of activists. Let's do that. Let's blah, blah. Wokeness is transforming into woke brigades, obviously. But also the others, unfortunately, the ones who try to oppose, unfortunately, in my opinion, they do worse than they can because it comes from the wrong place. You know, you're tired of working with yourself. It's very tempting to work on others. So tempting to work on others.
But I find it super interesting, this perspective actually, that all these reactions and we have on the outside is about our relationship with ourselves. Because I was contemplating this kind of attitude also even in the way that we talk about things like COVID, the big hot topic otherwise, even if this one is catching up here in the UK at least. Also there is like, we don't want to debate based on facts and proofs and so on. It's very, again, don't say anything but this because then you're wrong and you trigger and you are, should be punished sort of attitude. And to have the idea that that's actually about us not wanting concrete proof or a very clear way of examining things because we don't want to look at ourselves in that way and exactly hide our mistakes, for me is quite a revelation in this.
Yes. It's always a winner to look to the problem from inside, to see the problem inside you. What's the impact? What's your take on that problem? And solve it first. And when you solve it first, there is this principle of correspondence that was stated thousands of years ago, and actually it's illustrating the holographic structure of the universe that we have starting to validate today scientifically. What is here, says the ancient principle, in me, is everywhere in the universe, and what is not here is nowhere. Now, this kind of principle has a consequence, which is, if I can solve that problem here, it must start to solve everywhere. Of course, it sounds grandomaniac, this kind of thing. Like, what do you see? If I solve the problem inside of me completely, the world will revolutionize. Why not? Maybe this is what Jesus did. Maybe this is what other enlightened masters did. They managed to revolutionize the world because they did a very, very big step forward in solving the problems they pointed out inside of themselves. And not maybe. I put the maybe out of politeness because it's for sure that. Yeah. And everyone can check it in their relationship with the world. So yes, it is so important today. Solve it inside. If something triggers you, the trigger is inside you. It's not a trigger outside. It's a mistake to say. It's a terrible error. It's a joke almost to say, that triggered me. No, that was reminding you about a trigger inside. And then, you step on it and, alarm. And you feel bad, or who knows what, sometimes it's good triggers. But I never heard people complaining about good triggers. Did you hear? Like a kind of a cancel ecstatic culture things. Like everything that reminds me to be happy and makes me super happy, let's cancel it. It's boring. No. Which shows that it's biased, by the way, the whole attempt. Why? Let's cancel everything.
But where does our relationship to other people then come into this, I'm thinking? Because I mean, clearly, of course, there is the starting with myself, but how do we react or interact with other people in a way that is respectful and accepting and we can say tolerant in a real sense? Because surely that's part of the picture too, no?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the picture. You see, to tolerate others without knowing yourself, it's almost impossible. It's becoming a formalism. It becomes British. It becomes very formal in a certain way. That's why we build formalisms, because we can't truly tolerate, but we would like to. So it's a kind of a surrogate of living nice together. We realize, okay, I would punch you in the face if it was after me, but of course it's not nice. So I will put some masks. And by the way, speaking of masks, I will put some triple masks today to protect me from you and you from me. Now, of course, this appetite of putting masks that we obviously exteriorize today subconsciously is so much that we created an obsession of masks physically. But it's a expression of our rigidity, of rigid behavior. This is coming from the fact that we do not understand ourselves. We are totally strangers to ourselves. And of course, sooner or later, you start to conflict the other one. You start to disagree with the other one for reasons that you can't even tell. And then, of course, in order to save the day, you impose some rules. That's the reason why, for instance, I've seen it. If a person take a break from media, take a total break, go out in nature in a hut or somewhere, like we have in our school, these places where people go in a retreat. And then they take 7 days of every day a certain program of interiorization, focusing upon themselves, breathing techniques, a little bit of yoga. So they have a program in which the center of the attention is themselves. That's the interesting part. When they go out after 7 days, all their relationships with the world improve. Even though you would say, but wait a second, you actually cut yourself from the social media, you haven't communicated with your friends, you didn't say not a word to your family. How did that improve? Perhaps you were the problem, isn't it? Because you restrain from that communication for 7 days, and when you're back, many people are saying, wow, now I really appreciate their presence in my life. Now I really understand, and I'm not triggered by that attitude of that person, by this habit of this person. I understand them better. And then, of course, if you ask further, why do you think you understand them better? Invariably, the answer is the same. I think it's because I know better myself. I know how hard it is, for instance, to fight against that habit. And when that person comes with a bad habit, as usual, you are smiling, understanding, not necessarily blindly accepting. No, it's a bad habit, but I know how much you fight with it. I've been fighting myself with it. And even today, I didn't get rid of it, for instance. And then you are understanding. It's the true tolerance. When it's like the mutual respect. Two heroes, even if they are from opposite armies, always great heroes have respect to each other. Always cowards, they are so mean to the enemy. So, let's kill them all, let's do that. But the real heroes, they have compassion. Why? Because they have fought the battle. No matter which side you are, you understand the other side very well. Hey, they are also like us. They fought. They believe something. Only those who never fought, they are sadistic, They want to punish the enemy. They are totally imbalanced in their attitudes towards their enemy. It's a good example to understand, of course. This is an extreme example. But I'm just saying. That's the reason why today, in the ancient time, the politicians were the warriors. I mean, they were the same people. You go to the battle and then you take a decision home, Now, the politics is made by some people who never went to the battle, and then they send someone to do the battle. And of course, they take the most sadistic, idiotic decisions because other people are the ones executing the decisions. And through that, of course, a lot of deviant behavior appear. So therefore, to solve this, again, know thyself. And then you can tolerate others, you can understand others, you can live together. People who know themselves better live together with others better. People who don't know themselves, they can't live together with the others unless you put super strict, rigid rules to guard people from people, so to speak, which, of course, end up with the situation that we have today.
What I hear from this is also a bit that this woke movement is kind of, even those I met from such a perspective, are people who overthink things a lot and exactly have a lot of rules for how you interact with each other, whereas what you speak about is more relating to each other, we can say from the heart, or in a real way, in real time, and with respect and empathy, which is a very different way of being in the world, actually.
Yes, and empathy and all this capacity to feel others is cultivated from inside out. Empathy is a capacity that we experience when we acknowledge the interior, not the exterior. You cannot have empathy when you observe the exterior, no matter how much you observe the exterior. You can have pity eventually. You can have some reactions eventually. But when you start to observe your interior, you discover that empathically you can feel the one in front of you, as if it was you. And then, of course, for instance, some of the words that you are saying, you can feel, okay, I don't think I can use that. I know it will hurt you because I can feel it in me. And then you choose, maybe you're right. Maybe you're right what you are about to say. But hey, is it really necessary in that moment? And you choose to stay silent. And if you do it anyway, you still feel it. And then you realize, okay, yeah, I think it was too much for you. You can even give support in the struggle of that person and so on. So it's a chance to regulate our mechanism of interaction with each other much better, starting in this way. And then discovering empathy, intuition, superior parts of our consciousness, after all, superior functions of our consciousness. That anyway, we can cultivate through yoga exercises, also through meditation. So these are also subject of development. It's not something you are born with if you are and if you are not.
What I also found, like, for me, was quite eye-opening in your introduction, actually, was this idea, because now when we talk about cancel culture, it's very much about this overreacting and ostracizing anyone who doesn't agree with you, but that it actually leads to a cancel culture, and canceling out culture was a connection I hadn't made. And that somehow is...
Imagine, it's exactly like choosing to represent your inner state, one of the worst states throughout history, one of the most damaging states, pride. It's like, why do you choose that? Choose humbleness. Humbleness is a virtue. Why do you choose pride to represent you?
But I'm thinking
that's a joke of, the subconscious tendencies. It's the same, how do you end up canceling culture? Well, culture is what is exceptional, is the definition of the core of people, the core of nations. Why would you want to cancel culture? Call it something else, by the way. Call it, at least, in the Communist Party in China, they wanted to purge the elements, anti blah blah something, So they were a little more nuanced. Now we kind of lost the nuances and we want to cancel culture. No, nothing less but culture, including in this science. Mathematics is on the stake now today because it's white privilege to know mathematics.
So actually in this kind of totally misunderstood attempt of manifesting human virtue, we do the exact opposite and actually undermine the possibility of real human virtue in society. It's this idea of instead of me thriving, why don't you lower so that I don't feel underprivileged? If imagine this, this Procrustean story, the Procrustes bed, the myth of Procrustes, which was this tyrant which was forcing the travelers when crossing his land into a fixed frame, a bed, and if they have exactly the height, the size of the bed, they go. But if they were too short, they were stretched, of course, practically dismembered. And if they were too long, they were cut. So they fit in that bed, in that frame. Yeah. And very often it is like that. Probably they cancel culture long before they read that story. So therefore, this is the risk, You cancel culture, you cancel all the useful things to learn. About what? About your possible mistakes, by the way. Then you do what? Repeating the most hideous mistakes. But it seems to me then also that we're creating a world that doesn't actually help people grow or actually doesn't educate people. Because for sure this is not a new phenomena, but somehow it seems there is still a rise even from 20 years ago when I was in university until now. It seems to me that there has been a bit of shift in the attitude, and where otherwise intelligent people are completely incapable of having any common sense discussion about a topic without getting heated. So it seems maybe there's a bit of a trend as well, this overreacting and...
No, you see, the situation today started to be like this, especially as a price that we pay for lack of emotional education. Before, the implementation of science, implementation of different segments of human knowledge was not so deeply into the daily life. And for this reason, the process of education was not so much influenced by how much emotionally evolved you are. But today, when science became a religion, of course, the moral attitude influenced it a lot. So that's why people refuse unconsciously to learn. They block the process of growth and learning because of these moral deficiencies. And moral deficiencies are coming because of lack of emotional self-knowledge and, you can say, emotional education. Low EQ, low emotional intelligence. And that's the problem today. So practically, while we evolved in all kind of, or the domain of science explored so many versions of reality, so to speak, we are emotionally retards. And because of that, then we started to have irrational reactions to science. Remember the discoverer of DNA and the one who made huge progress in that, Nobel Prize for this and for other major contribution in the world of science, was withdrawn all the academic titles, including Nobel Prize, just because he refused to withdraw, just like Galileo Galilei, to withdraw the scientific results that he obtained from studying races, different human races. He studied, he was curious to see, is there a difference Are there certain differences? And what he discovered scientifically with very solid results was that yes, there are some differences. Differences is not bad. Today we say, let's be inclusive, but we are so scared of differences. Well, inclusive, this is what it means. That you can be different than me, and I can even prove it that you are different than me, but it's fine. You have something, I have something, and it's not a problem. But today they say hypocritically, oh, let's be inclusive, which means let's cancel differences. What are you talking about? This is even irrational, which is exactly the point. But what I'm saying, that man, he refused to cancel because he cannot. This was his argument. I'm a scientist, and the only way I can withdraw is if you come with studies that shows the opposite. What was the reaction of the academia? They just withdraw his titles. Instead of coming with some results to show, look, yes, there are studies. And then he said, I will publicly declare, yes, these studies that I did was proven wrong, no problem. But I cannot just deny something that I scientifically discovered and proved, yeah, just like the other discoveries for which he was praised, just because it's politically something.
So it's an old story, not a new one.
No, it's not a new one. It's a tendency that we have today. We pay for it because today we do not become aware of the fact that many of our decisions are emotionally influenced, and emotionally we are retards in most of the cases, while intellectually we are more advanced, much, much more advanced. And because of this big difference, which we do not acknowledge, and we do not acknowledge its effects, we are in this strange situation that even though evolved technologically, we have some reactions that are kind of kindergarten-like. So, Maria, we are getting close to the end. What would be a conclusion you would go home with from our talk today?
I mean, my first realization for sure was this idea that actually when we have a cancel culture, what we end up canceling is culture, and that has a huge impact on human virtue. And then, of course, the very big revelation that maybe is not as much about our relationship with other human beings as it is about our relationship with ourselves. And the lack of inner honesty and willingness to grow and to admit our mistakes that make us become so sensitive to anyone pointing out something that we don't like, to the extent that we almost aggressively somehow will push that away. And that actually the more aggressively we are acting towards others in such a fashion, the more it shows that we lack the ability to really be intimate somehow with ourselves first and foremost, and then therefore also with other people, which gives a very strange way of interacting. So that cancel culture is an expression maybe of lack of intimacy, not by chance fueled a lot by social media, where we also don't have really real contact to each other. And therefore somehow all disillusions point back to us, even if of course the tendency is to look how can we solve it on the outside. Actually it is about first solving it here, changing our attitude, and maybe also daring to actually have these conversations and set an example that it's possible.
Yes. I couldn't say it better myself. Thank you.
So I'm really, really happy that I had the chance to speak about these things, because I feel even, this sense of hope that comes with just being able to voice it and actually, put concerns out there and talk about it much more than anything else.
Well, we barely scratched the surface now.
True.
On the subject, but thank you, and let's do it again. Let's pick up the subject or related topics, because we're not lacking subjects around this central topic, and we can find quite interesting elements deep inside of ourselves and our society today when digging, following such a topic. So thank you again for joining me, Maria.
Thank you so much. I'd love to explore it further.
More will happen, therefore, in this, when silent majority will speak out, we can cancel the cancel culture for good. Stay tuned. Please write your comments and your questions. And remember, being alive is a continuous transformation. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Continuous Transformation podcast. For more episodes, articles, and events, visit advaitananda.com.